I spent just over 15 years teaching in the public school system, and along the way, I taught and coached a lot of different things. If you've ever been in education or coaching, you already know this. There's a constant low-level pressure to produce, not just to care about the kids, not just to show up and do your job well, but to be able to prove that what you're doing is working. We talk a lot about outcomes. Scholarships come up often. Academic ones, athletic ones. We talk about wins, test scores, data, growth charts, and programs that look successful on paper. And usually, there's an unspoken timeline attached to all of it, because someone, somewhere, is waiting on an email that needs to look good. And here's where it starts to get complicated. A lot of parents will tell you, sincerely, that they don't want their kids pressured. They want them to enjoy it. They want the classroom to be fun, the sport to be fun. They want balance. They don't want them pushed too hard. And I believe them when they say that. But at the same time, many of those same parents are hoping for outcomes. Scholarships, high achievement, doors opened that almost always come with pressure attached. That tension doesn't make them bad parents. It makes them human. But it does put everyone involved in a difficult position, because teachers and coaches end up living in the middle of that tension. We're told not to push too hard, while being expected to produce results that rarely come without pushing. And then there are the other end of the spectrum. Parents who push relentlessly, sometimes to the point where kids burn out before they even have a chance to enjoy what they're doing. And then there's another group entirely. Parents who don't seem to care at all, but still expect teachers and coaches to somehow create motivation, discipline, and drive out of thin air. No matter where you turn, the pressure exists. It sits on the kids, it sits on the parents, and it sits heavily on the people leading them. And if you stay in that kind of system for long, something subtle and honestly dangerous starts to happen. You stop measuring success by growth or faithfulness. You start measuring it by output. And once output becomes the measure, you don't just evaluate your work, you start evaluating your worth. Over the course of my coaching career, I was part of taking a program that had never really been competitive and seeing it become consistently strong. Multiple top 10 finishes at state, a team runner-up, and a lot of individual state championships. On the teaching side, I was part of a school that statistically wasn't expected to be high achieving, but through intentional instruction and intervention, we saw some of the highest academic growth in the state for multiple years. And I want to be clear, that was good work. It mattered. It was worth celebrating. But here's what surprised me. Even when you produce the results, even when the data looks right, even when you meet or beat the expectations, it still doesn't give you an identity that actually holds. You hit the goal, you meet the standard, you do what was asked of you, and something is still missing. And hitting the standard doesn't answer the question, am I enough? It just delays it. Because production can make you successful, but it quietly trains you to believe that success is who you are. And once that belief sets in, the pressure doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Success can come from what you produce, but identity was never meant to. Welcome to Grace in the Grind, brought to you by Arrow and Roots Coffee Company, where faith meets the everyday. Here we take time to notice God's presence in the middle of life's busiest moments, to find encouragement, clarity, and a reminder of His grace right in the grind of daily life. So grab your coffee, and let's take a sip of this cup together. And before we go any further, let me pause for just a second and tell you what's brewed today. Today, I've got Ozark Roots. More on that soon, but it's a smooth, balanced medium roast. Just really easy to drink, steady kind of coffee. I had it as an espresso. And by had it, I mean I drank it already. So if my thoughts start to slow down, we'll know why. But it's one of those coffees that just feels steady. Not flashy, not trying to prove anything. It's just solid, which honestly, is probably a better way to live than most of us are used to. But now on to what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about productivity, not as something evil, not as something we need to reject outright, but as something dangerous when it quietly becomes the place we look for identity. Most of us didn't chase the wrong things. We chased good things: responsibility, diligence, providing for our families, stewarding our gifts well. And in many ways, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. We planned carefully. We worked hard. We showed up early and stayed late. We made sacrifices that mattered. That's what makes this conversation so uncomfortable, because the tension here isn't between faithfulness and irresponsibility. It's between faithfulness and formation. We rarely stop to ask what our work was shaping us into, or what it was training us to believe about ourselves. Because work is never just producing something out there. It's forming something in here. The passage we're building from today is Psalm 127. And my hope is simple: that by the end of this cup, you'll see why Scripture affirms work and effort while refusing to let productivity tell the truth about who you are. Before we talk about limits, rest, or identity, we need to be clear about something Scripture is very clear about. God designed us to work. Work is not a result of sin. It's not a concession to a broken world. In Genesis 2, before sin ever enters the picture, Adam is placed in the garden to work it and keep it. That language matters. The idea isn't extraction or survival, it's participation. Adam is invited to join God in sustaining what God already declared good. So productivity itself isn't the problem. Productivity is a gift until it becomes your proof. Creating, building, teaching, coaching, providing, all of that reflects God's character. The problem shows up when we start asking work to do something it was never meant to do. Psalm 127 names this clearly. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Notice the psalm doesn't say, don't build. It assumes builders, plans, long days. What it confronts is the belief that we are the ones holding everything together. That belief rarely looks like arrogance. It usually looks like responsibility that slowly stops trusting God. And responsibility becomes dangerous when it turns into identity, because responsibility was meant to be carried with God, not in place of Him. Here's where the drift usually happens. Most of us didn't decide to replace God with productivity. We just let productivity become the scoreboard of whether our work and our lives were meaningful. Output became proof. Proof that we were doing enough. Proof that we matter. Proof that we're not falling behind. And because productivity is praised everywhere, exhaustion slowly starts to feel normal, even admirable. Somewhere along the way, I'm exhausted became a credential. Like exhaustion became evidence that we're doing life right. Scripture has a word for that. Anxious toil. Not laziness, not rebellion, misplaced trust. It's not that we stopped believing in God. It's that we started living like everything depended on us. Anxious toil shows up when work stops being participation with God and becomes protection against fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being overlooked. Fear of not being enough. And when not enough is the fear, productivity starts to feel like survival. This is where grace meets us. Jesus does not love you because you are useful. He does not approve of you because you are productive. Your identity was settled before you ever accomplished anything, which means your value was never waiting on your performance. At Jesus' baptism, before a sermon or miracle, the Father says, "This is my beloved Son." Beloved comes before productive. Psalm 127 echoes that when it says, He gives sleep to His beloved. Rest isn't a reward. It's a gift grounded in identity. Grace doesn't call you away from work. It calls you to work from a different place, not to prove something, but because something is already true. So here's the invitation for this week. Not to fix everything, not to overhaul your life, just to notice. Because you can't change what you haven't named. Where do you feel the most pressure to prove you're doing enough? What do you feel guilty resting from? That's usually where identity has gotten tangled up with output. What would trusting God look like here realistically? Choose one small act of resistance. Stop work at a set time. Say no once. Rest without explaining yourself. Not because everything is finished, but because God is still in control. And remind yourself out loud, God is the builder. I am His beloved. If you want to help support this ministry, grab a bag of coffee from Aaron Roots Coffee Company. It's one of the simplest ways to do that. You get good coffee, and it helps keep these conversations going. It also gives you a socially acceptable excuse to step away from being productive for a few minutes, which according to today's episode, might actually be obedience. If this episode connected with you, don't rush past it. And if you know someone who's responsible, dependable, always getting things done, but quietly tired of trying to be enough, send this episode to them. Send it to 5 people. Consider it permission, delivered with caffeine, to stop earning what God already gives freely. Because grace was never something you had to keep proving you deserved. Thanks for listening to Grace in the Grind, where we keep our coffee strong and our faith stronger. You are more than what you produce, and you don't have to prove otherwise. We'll see you in the next cup.